Welcome. It is so good to have you all here. I really feel privileged and honored that you've decided to spend some time with us today. My name is Brianna Sylver. I am the president and founder of Sylver Consulting. And joining me with the webinar today is my senior director of innovation research and strategy, Peter Bürgi.
Hello and welcome.
So today we're going to be here talking about symbolics. So what is symbolics? It is a cutting edge tool for revealing patterns of unconscious associations that drive consumer behavior. More specifically, one second. More specifically, it's a strategic method. And it's a strategic method that gets to the systems one thinking beneath consumer behavior. So, if the jargon of systems one, systems two is maybe a little unfamiliar to you, what that means is it's really the emotional gut reaction that people have to questions or decisions that are posed to them. And more specifically, this method really supports organizations to define brand strategy, build brand activation visions, and then fill innovation pipelines. So, when it comes to defining brand strategy, what this method has proven to do very well is to really support the creation of swim lanes. Now, that can be creating a swim lane between your brand and competitive brands in the marketplace, for instance. It can also be looking at your portfolio of brands and saying, what is the distinct role and purpose of specific SKUs of that portfolio, for instance, among your marketplace. When it comes to building brand activation visions, this method is really great for sizing the opportunity of new brand platforms, as well as getting to the core of what the messaging point should be to really bring forward specific brand platform ideas. And then lastly, when it comes to filling innovation pipelines, this methodology is really supportive to really defining the innovation guardrails around a new offering, as well as then creating clarity and alignment on sort of the core things that must exist to really stand out in the marketplace for your offering area. Now, going a little bit deeper into systems one thinking and specifically, what symbolics does versus other methods is that it does really tap into what is the brain's fast, automatic, emotional, and subconscious approach to understanding the world. And so Peter's going to walk us through how the methodology specifically works, but you're posing a question to people, and then they are going to be building expressions that then really show you how do they think about it at the gut level? What are those habits and instinctual behaviors that they're referencing as they think about the topic or brand that's being presented to them? Now, this is different than systems two thinking, where then you're typically, basically posing something and then people are using their brain to really walk through and sort of rationalize how do they think about your brand or your offering. So it gives another layer of information. And I think that this is really, brought forward in the sense of, system one, as we know from our Nobel Prize winner, is that, it's really it's the systems thinking that is really driving what happens. It's guiding your system to thinking and it's steering that to a very large extent. And so I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to turn it over to Peter, who's going to walk us through exactly how does symbolics work.
Yeah, thanks, Brianna. Yeah, in talking about how symbolics works, there's going to be less focus now on what I present to you on, if you will, sort of like, how the motor actually works. And let's focus on like sort of where the car actually gets you and why it does that. So symbolics as a process, as a tool, is really brilliant at synchronizing and bringing together both qual and quant data sets for large groups. The process by which it happens is laid out in these 6 steps here. The first step is that in an online platform environment, a question about a brand or topic is posed to a large group of consumers. Typically, we need 250 people or more to do this properly. So there's a large group of consumers that has been assembled for this process, who are targeted to a specific need or purpose. These respondents are then presented with a set of curated materials with which they're asked to produce some qualitative expressions. We call these expressions, some people have sometimes referred to them as collages as well. Now, they're using this set of curated materials, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about the curation in just a second here, to produce these things these expressions so that we can then analyze them for subsequent understanding of what the large patterns of meaning and behavior are. As they're creating these expressions, the survey tool is capturing each expression that is created, and each one of these expressions then is linked to metadata about the respondents' demographics and background, but also importantly, it's linked to the specific activities that the respondent used in creating that expression. What happens next is that as all of these expressions are come together, there is an algorithm in the background. It's a patented quantitative algorithm that analyzes all of the different expressions that have been brought together and begins to describe what the prominent associative relationships are that have been pulled together in each one of these expressions and in the aggregate in order to define sort of what is really prominent and consistent in all of that. That what happens next is that a map of these aggregate associative relationships is generated that really articulates, gives voice to what the deep pattern of associations are. And then finally, it's by referring to the specific qualitative expressions that were produced that we can begin to understand, so what exactly is the meaning of those associative relationships that have been pulled together. So just a quick review of this process here. In the platform, the question is posed to this group of consumers. They produce these expressions. The activities by which they produce the expressions are tracked and monitored and captured. The quantitative algorithm analyzes and pulls all that information together and produces a single map that shows the most prominent relationships among all of the 250 plus expressions that were created. So with that, then let's talk a little bit about why it is that there are specific elements that make Symbolics as effective as it is. The first thing I want to spend some time talking about is the fact that the stimuli set that's used, the images and words, is actually curated and customized to each specific project. These are not generic image sets. These are not generic stimuli that's used the same from one project to the next. Instead, the robustness of this process lies in the fact that the stim set is customized to the specific needs of the project. What's the process by which we customize that? It begins with some grounding work looking at the consumer target, understanding in collaboration typically with the brand team or the other members on the client side that we're working with to understand what the basic grounding information about this consumer target is. Next, and most importantly, there's a large workshopping step where we work together, typically face-to-face, with a large group of individuals that includes the client team members as well as some consumers from that target group to start creating a set of images and terms that will constitute the final curated stim set that's used. Next, we take everything that was pulled out of that particular workshop and we go through a series of iterative steps together with the client to start refining and winnowing that set down until we arrive at a final version that's going to capture all the pathways of potential associations that there may be for consumers in this space. So this is, the process by which we curate and customize these steps is really at the very heart of what makes this process so effective, because it's not generic. It's not just sort of like putting the typical sort of projective techniques of, oh, here's a picture of a sun, here's a picture of a butterfly, here's a picture of an old shoe in front of consumers and saying, which one would you choose to represent X? No, this is actually putting a relevant and curated and customized set of stim in front of consumers so that what they're drawing from to represent the answers that they have to the questions that's posed to them is actually drawing from really relevant material. So that's the first key element behind our effectiveness. The second key element behind this is that this tool captures all of the respondent dynamics as they are producing the output that they're doing. So it begins, as we said, with the respondents being exposed to a prompt. They're asked to produce a single expression, to that particular prompt. 250 people, typically, not all at the same time. It does not have to be occurring simultaneously, but 250 people exposed to the prompt, creating these expressions. Now, as each individual creates the expression, they're number one, they're selecting from a small set of background images. And they're also selecting certain icon images that can be added to this. They can add to this also words, and then finally give some sort of a caption to the expression that they create. Again, this is not just free form randomly from a larger set of STEM, but from the curated set of STEM that they've been presented with. What's happening though as they're doing this is that the tool is tracking how it is that they are assembling and building up that expression, because there's meaningful information in how they build it. So all aspects of the way that they're doing, from the time they select a background image all the way to the final captioning, that's all captured by this tool, because all of these actions, all of these dynamics are data that are being weighed by the analysis that the algorithm performs. So this is not just produce a collage or an expression and let's look at it. It's also looking at the process by which it's created and gleaning valuable nuggets of information that are weighed in the algorithm as we go along. So the third then element that makes this so effective is the fact that what happens then is that these group of 250 plus expressions are then brought together. The algorithm is identifying not only the associative relationships in each particular expression, the fact that this word trust, seems to associate strongly with the word honest, or that the word genuine associates strongly with the word sincere, or something like that. It identifies that for every individual expression, but it then aggregates the expressions and identifies a single common construct, a normalized version of the associative relationships for the entire group. Now, this is where the magic of, as I said at the outset, bringing together both qual and quant data sets happens. It's so often the case that when we use projective techniques, we don't really have a way of aggregating all of the information from the projective techniques beyond just sort of saying people seem to talk about X element or Y element a lot. No, what we have in this case here is we have all this rich projective information, which is then mathematically and quantitatively weighed and analyzed to determine the strength, the closeness, the intensity of the associative relationships among these sorts of things. And out of that calculus, then, to produce a single common construct for the whole group. So, I see there's a question from Janine who says, are the words and the captions curated as well, or just the images? Super question. So the words that are used, the specific words or phrases, and the specific images that are used, those are in fact, yes, curated. They're part of a customized closed universe of STEM that the respondents then choose from. The captions can be more free form. They can draw from outside of just that closed universe. But the key thing is that because we have the closed universe of stimulus word expressions and images, that's really the key thing that allows us then to do that quantitative processing of the information with the algorithm to arrive at this single common construct for the whole group. You're basically getting a snapshot of what the meaningful relationships are among these elements for a large target group. It's sort of like the best of qual and the best of quant, boom, all together in one. Let's go on to the full, yeah.
I just wanted to expand on Janine's question as well. So I'm not sure that we've explicitly stated it. When it comes to the stimuli set, what we're ultimately curating is 20 background images, 40 icons, and then roughly about 250 words. And so when people are pulling together, so that's, somewhere in the neighborhood of about, 300 plus elements that they have access to. And then they are not able to add new imagery to the set. However, if for some reason someone doesn't find a word that they would want to be adding to the set, they do have the ability to type in a new word that goes with it. And then, as Peter said, the captions themselves are free form. However the individual wants to title that is appropriate.
Super. Thank you for that additional layer of clarification, Brianna. So let's look at the fourth thing that makes this symbolics as effective as it is. You take a look at the sort of the image on the right-hand side of the slide here. It looks like a sort of a series of graphical representations of relationships between elements, between words, images, and sometimes across words and images. This is an example of the sort of output that the symbolics tool then produces. You get these not only the multiple levels of associations, but you get clear visual representations, this graphing of what the intuitive associations are between different components. So for instance, in this image here, the very strong relationship between the words true and real, as you see in the lower right legend there, that's, as this tool identifies it, that's a tier 1 relationship. That's an especially strong and potent and determinative associative relationship between those two elements. A tier 2 relationship is actually between the words genuine and real. That's that purple, slightly more curved line. So you see the output from this tool here is really layering in so many components of meaning. We're seeing what the most prominent and then also what some of the underlying supportive associative relationships are between terminology, words, and images. And then when we take this aggregate output here, this normalized construct of the meaningful associative relationships that a group has, we can go back to the individual expressions and understand them in a much richer way by looking for the specific meanings that people are bringing to this. So I see there's a question that Russ has posed to Brianna. Brianna, would you like to take a look at that question, or would you like me to
Yeah,
answer?
happy to. So Russ asked, does the algorithm account for semantics that can vary with the sequence in which they're used? Absolutely. So when we come in with the stimuli set, of course, we've had many conversations in that multi-phased stimuli workshop that Peter walked us through around the multiple levels of meaning that each image, for instance, or word could have in these various different pathways that we're thinking. So that's kind of the way that we pressure test the stimuli set for breadth, if you will. However, I'm not a mathematician to know all the many, but when you're starting with 310 or 300, plus elements, there's infinite number of pairs of connection. And so what we do, and I think this is an appropriate time to talk about sort of how do we use this. So we've got this map that the algorithm is showing us, saying, okay, true and real, for instance, are very tightly connected. So when it comes to an analysis perspective, what we then do is we look at every expression that used the stimuli elements of true and real on them. Now that could be ones that were actually published with true and real, or it could also be, because it tracks every activity that's happening, elements or expressions where maybe somebody used the word true and then their system two started kicking in and they decided, no, I don't want to use true. I want to use authentic instead, for instance. But their innate reaction was to pull the word true. And so what we then do is we say, okay, we want to look at every expression that has the word true and real. And now we do qualitative analysis on each of those expressions. And we say, okay, in expression one of this set, with the true and real, what are they really trying to communicate there? And then we go to expression two. What are they trying to communicate with true, real there? And we go through all of them that way. And basically, we use this map that's on the screen right now, and we go through at each tier of connection, usually down to covering tier 1 through tier 4 of those connections, to really start to understand what are those pairs of connection coming to. And then when you look at it in the aggregate, Now if this particular map is saying, what does authenticity mean to me? We know for the females who are between the ages of like 18 to 25, let's say, that this map represents, we know what authenticity holistically means for that group of people by moving through that level of analysis through tiers 1 through tier 4. And so in that sense, it can mean anything essentially, and we're using both data sets to really get underneath what is really being defined here for people.
Yeah, I mean, when you think of typically the opposition between what does qual bring you, what does quant bring you, people say qual goes deep, it's the vertical. Quant goes broad, it's the horizontal. So this opposition between sort of like, the vertical and horizontal, this is a technique that's actually bringing both together, you're getting both breadth, all the normalized construct of a large group together with the depth, the insight that a good projective technique that tracks all of the different activities of creation will really bring to you. So Russ asks, is this based on the images or moving the images? It's based on both. And this is one of the potent parts of this tool, Russ, is that by tracking the act of creation of the expression, you're gathering the meaningful information about which words or images were used first, how were they shifted around, what happened in the process of creating it to arrive at the final version of it. Because as Brianna said, very often the final versions in some cases might have started to pick up and trigger some of that systems two thinking, where people are starting to analyze what it is that they did as opposed to what their initial gut response to something is. That gut response is invaluable. It tells us what is often really driving behavior. So by tracking not only the final images, but the moving of the images as well, Russ, we're actually able to get a much richer and much more insightful data set.
All right. And the last thing I want to say before we kind of move towards what do you get out of this is related to the number of people. So Peter has mentioned, kind of 250 people being a min as he's gone through, just discussing how it works. I would say the typical project that we run with Symbolics is usually around anywhere from about 1,500 to 2,500 individuals. And so when we say 250 people, it's not a max by any means. It's just however you want to kind of cut your data. You want to make sure that you have roughly, really 200 to 250 people, but just for the extra confidence layer, we suggest 250 people. So if you want to be then, taking your data set and you want to cut it by gender, or you want to cut it by age band, or you want to cut it by geographic region of the United States, or whatever it may be, you want to make sure in whatever cut of that data, you've got, basically between 200 and 250 people who are going to fall within that set to really have more of that statistical significance, confidence underneath the data that's coming back to you. All right, I'm going to move us into, so what do you get out of this? Peter just walked us through kind of like the mechanics of how the method works, what the experience of a potential client is going through it, what the experience of our respondents are as they're doing it. But of course, it all makes sense if it delivers, good stuff that then you can use to deliver ROI back to your brand. And so what we do is we then say, okay, here's all of what we learned about, kind of what brand X means, for instance. And then we package that into different strategic tools that are going to then support your brand and innovation planning efforts. Now, one thing to note is that we don't have sort of like canned templates, if you will, that this information goes into. It really gets aligned to your unique needs and goals. We really try to tap into, what are the tools that your own organization uses to support brand and innovation planning, so you're not redoing work. But we're really trying to then package the information in a way that can be usable for you. And so what you see on the left is an example of sort of generative and evaluative frameworks that came out of the Millennial Authenticity Study. So we did this study a couple years back at Sylver. I mean, it's kind of dated at this point. But I think what came out of that is, hey, there's these 5 qualities that really define what does authenticity mean to our millennials. And so, at the top level, we've got this true, real, this genuine, sincere. This is really like driving it. Like, this is the core, if you will. And then underneath it, there's these 3 different ways in which that is expressed. You don't need to have all 3 of those to be authentic or real. You only need to kind of check off on one. But if you come across not as true or real, or come across not as genuine or sincere, like, it's a game stopper, right? And so then underneath this, and you can access this millennial authenticity study on our website if you're interested in just seeing, kind of how it came from there. But then that ended up leaning into an entire brand, evaluation matrix that brands could then use to then say, how are we really showing up when it comes to these qualities? And then ultimately starting constructive conversations within the brand team to say, in what ways could we be more true and real and more genuine, sincere? What is the right pathway? Is it about uniqueness and originality? Is it about integrity, grit, or is it about being human? What's the right way to activate that sense of authenticity for our particular brand? And so we've had several people who have accessed that, who have then reported back saying, that was really super helpful for just helping me to get my brand, started, particularly individuals who kind of had new brands that they were trying to get into the market. So that's one example. The next is these brand ladder frameworks, that's off to the right here. And so this is a situation where, the brand team was trying to understand, okay, do I go down platform path 1, 2, or 3? And so, this just kind of starts to then say, all right, if you go down platform A, for instance, this is what it looks like that you need to be able to activate to win. So these are the emotional needs and desired outcomes that you need to tap into. These are the specific consumer problems that you've got to solve. And this is what your brand and or its products should do in support of solving those problems. And then, what the potential competitive set to that particular platform of opportunity would be. And so this is something that then, the brand team could then look at and say, okay, we've got basically territory 1 and territory 2 that are options for us. Let's look at what the requirements are and which one can we truly and authentically really step into, and then made a decision of which direction to go for themselves. So these are just 2 examples. There's many more. The key takeaway is that we're repackaging the Symbolics information. You're not just going to get the spaghetti map that's this, but you actually get this information packaged in a way that really supports forward traction for your organization. So I want to bring you through 2 case studies just to kind of give you more of a practical of how does this actually play out in the real world. I will give a shout out to PepsiCo. They've been very supportive of this methodology and have really helped us to create it and improve it over the years. 2 that I want to share is, this was one that was done fairly recently with Fritos. And specifically, the brand was really, struggling to know how best to sort of build the bridge between, what the Fritos brand was known as in the past and where they really wanted it to grow to. So they wanted to be a brand that was loved for its role in the family. And so they partnered with us to really help them to identify what the core tenets of the bridge between Fritos today and Fritos tomorrow might be. And so more specifically, we use the Symbolics methodology. This was one that there was, over 2,000 people who are part of the project, to really understand the role and meaning of what Fritos today was for consumers. We wanted to define what it would take for the Fritos brand to really rise to its new positioning. So they already had new positioning of, we're the stand-up chip that's down for everything defined. But we needed to understand, what does that really mean to people? What does it mean to be a stand-up chip? What does it mean for a chip that's down for everything, for instance? And then we needed to articulate what the gateway might be for having that stand-up chip that's down for everything positioning take root in the identity and hearts of their consumer, which they had defined as sort of the heartsteader. And so what came out of this was really a go-to-market communication strategy brief for Fritos. They really offered the blueprint for how they could take root in the heartsteader consumer, into the heart of the heartsteader consumer. And then, basically really then be that stand-up chip that's down for everything. And so very happy and proud to report that, of course, the Frito took this, their agency got involved, then they turned it into, some video spots and some additional, communication. But just 6 months after deployment of this strategy, after they understood what it meant to get into the heart of their consumers, they were able to lift their brand score by 13 points in less than 6 months after deployment. And so, based upon that experience, and then the many years of experience up to this point, Fritos has gone as far, or PepsiCo has gone as far as to consider this a best-in-class example of really how to do tribe-based messaging platform work for their organization. Another example is, with Doritos, and more specifically the hot and spicy portfolio of Frito-Lay, where, a few years back, we're going back probably about 5 years ago, maybe, the sales team said, our Flamin' Hot Cheetos is outpacing growth of the brand's core product and other brands in its portfolio. So it's clear, that there's value in this Flamin' Hot asset that we've got, and we're trying to figure out how to fuel a pipeline of new products for this hot and spicy portfolio. But they needed insight on how to really intentionally use that flavor across the broader portfolio to really inform innovation, communication, and package design guardrails for future product. So again, we leveraged Symbolics to really understand what were the emotional unconscious associations that consumers had for really the hot and spicy experience. And so it involved two pieces. We used the learnings from consumer research to have that 2-day stimuli workshop that Peter talked about. And then we did use Symbolics to field with nationwide with basically 1,800 respondents. And so the result of this work really supported, for the first time actually in the history of the company, to really bring the beverage and snack business together. So that was something that was brand new. It also led to a framework that has now since launched 4 new products over at Frito-Lay. So Doritos Blaze, Doritos Flamin' Hot Nacho, Doritos Flamin' Hot Limon, and Doritos Flamin' Hot Cool Ranch. And each of them have exceeded sales projections for what the org had for them. And then also, as a result of what came out of this from a learning and insights perspective, is that it sparked a series of impactful both in-store merchandising and TV advertising. And at that point, it supported the creation of the most talked about Super Bowl ad ever in the history of PepsiCo for bringing Blaze and Mountain Dew Ice together. All right, we've got another question here. Where it says people have greater difficulty assessing the understandability of low-res concepts in 2D versus 3D versus functional prototypes. Do you have a recommended start point? I'm not sure that I fully understand that question. Do you have a take on that one, Peter?
Yeah, my take on this is, this is actually a really good question. I'm delighted, Russ, you brought this forward. So, as I understand it, I think you're thinking that we're looking for people to create expressions to particular prototypes, if you will. And in fact, what we're asking them to do is to create expressions to prompt questions. So this is really not about having them experience a prototype and then react to it, but instead just to react to a prompt question. There aren't any prototypes involved in this particular tool. It's the prompt question, the curated stim set, the expressions that are created, the analysis of all the expressions to arrive at the common construct, and then the mapping out in the tier 1, 2, 3, 4 relationships of associative relationships. So I think that's a super clarification. Thank you very much for asking.
Yeah, and I guess just to put a little bit more context on that, so like for instance, with this Fritos project, we asked 3 different types of prompt questions. We asked, for when we were trying to just understand who the Hartstetter consumer was, we said, what do we need to know about you to really know you? Right? We already knew that they quote unquote met our Hartstetter requirements because we screened them in based upon that. And so we just needed to know, like, what do we need to know about you to really know you? And then, for people who we were trying to understand what their current Fritos experience was, then we said, we kind of broke it into the three different types of Fritos products that are out in the market. And we said, what's the role and meaning of, Fritos core, for instance, or the Fritos snack in your life? And then, we had a similar prompt in that stand up chip section. And so that allowed then to really fully understand, how do you move from, today to tomorrow? And everybody's using the same stimuli set. So you start to understand where those points of convergence and divergence are, which kind of gives you the sense of how much space do you need to move them to move from that today versus tomorrow. The last thing I wanted to share is, we have, this is a methodology that's been in development for many years. And we've had the pleasure of using it with a variety of different brands, a sample of them off to the right. You'll notice that lots of snack brands, as I mentioned, PepsiCo and specifically Frito-Lay has been incredibly generous in their support of this methodology to date. But I think the other thing that is with that is they believe in it. And so, many of these brands we've worked with multiple times as well to really support, fueling their brand positioning. So that brings us to, kind of where our last kind of wrap up here before we really get into some active questions. So if you've got them, please put them in the chat. Is, now that you kind of have a better understanding, I might ask you to just reflect on the question of, where and how do you think Symbolics might support your own brand planning and innovation efforts? Or what additional questions that might you have that kind of are, I'm not sure 100% about that. And the last thing I want to share here, just in terms of a point of view from others who've walked through this process with us, one off to the left there says, I cannot tell you how much value our entire team received, not only out of the Symbolics output, but of the process and how integral the work has become to our positioning decks. And then off to the right, our findings from earlier this year have become the foundation of our new brand strategy and innovation pipeline for next year, which includes bringing a new brand to market and expanding another brand in our portfolio. Thank you. The one on the left really highlights another piece of this process that I don't think we've celebrated enough, if you will, in this conversation, and that is how valuable the process of just going through this methodology is for the client. That 2-day stimuli workshop, or it's actually 2 half days, up at the upfront, really drives a ton of alignment around a brand team before they even get started. It really highlights, kind of where they are aligned and maybe where they are divergent in their thinking, because of the level of which we kind of peel back the onion, if you will, to get to these potential pathways of explanation. And so I think the process itself is super supported. And then, of course, the output is, incredibly powerful to achieve their insight objectives. And so with that, I want to really open it up to any questions. Is there anything that Peter and I can answer about the methodology, about its use, about its limitations, anything that would be valuable for you to hear, to kind of walk away, with, at least for you to be able to say, I get Symbolics now?
As you're thinking about this, I'll just add in again, the layer here that's, I think, so exciting about this approach, which is that, people have struggled for years to really get a handle on, how to square together, the understanding of broad group behavior with the deep understanding of meaning at an individual level. And it's just so potent the way this tool brings together both of those things. So I see some comments are actually, some questions are sort of popping up here. Let's see, a comment, it's a good fit, that this technique is a good fit for B2C CPG. Also, good targets would be ad agencies and larger research firms. Absolutely, these are very often enterprises and organizations that are struggling to reconcile exactly that understanding of large groups behavior together with the deep meaning of what's actually motivating the behavior in those groups. So yeah, I agree completely, Alan. There's a lot of potency for this technique in exactly those environments. Yeah. Another question is curious if this process works across cultures. Oh my God, what a great question. And yes, that's me speaking as an anthropologist. So, yes, it works across cultures. The thing that's distinctive, when you're talking about one culture versus another, is we all know that we all eat, we drink, we fall in love, have all the sorts of things that are common to human beings. But what differentiates us from one culture to another are the specific associative patterns of meaning and relationships. That's really kind of at the heart of what culture often is. And so, in going through a process of customizing a stimulus set to be the relevant set of reference, that stable set of background images and icons and words that Brianna sort of itemized for us, you're able actually to customize this to specific cultural contexts. So this is a tool that you can use in all sorts of different cultural contexts. It's not just a tool that works, shall we say, just in sort of Western industrialized environments. It'll work in all environments. So yes, absolutely, it works across cultures.
So there's another question about, I would like to know about the limitations of symbolics. So this actually harkens back to the comment that Alan had a few moments ago, in the sense of, I think the key limitation is that you have to be able to access a minimum of 250 individuals who represent that group. So it does position it a little bit more towards B2C, business to consumer based work versus business to business work. Um, but it's not exclusive. It's just more that, however you want to be able to cut the data, you've got to have a minimum of 250 people. So that's one key limitation. Another limitation is that you have to be able to ask one question, right? Or each person gets one question. You can ask multiple questions, and different people who are responding get different questions. But this is not a replacement, for instance, to a qualitative one-on-one interview. It wouldn't even be in the same vein of exploration, because basically people are going to get one question and they are going to build an expression to answer that one question. And so your power is in the aggregate. Now, you can pair symbolics with other quantitative methodologies. So, for instance, we've paired it with, an attitudes and usage study, for instance, where you have maybe 10 minutes of attitudes and usage on the front end, and then they engage with symbolics. So, you can pair it a little bit with some other quantitative techniques. You just wouldn't want to have like a 15 to 20-minute survey, for instance, and then ask them to develop an expression, because what you would get would be probably not so great. But those would be some of the key limitations related to it. We've also have Russ asking, what can you tell us about working with health systems and continuing to build a health related personal care brand? So, Russ, this is all about like understanding who it is that you're targeting. I think that this very much could be a methodology leverage, because you have to understand, basically what is the personal care brand stand for. Now, that might take us a situation where, depending upon where you are in that process, uh, you might have a couple different potential definitions or sort of articulations of what that personal care brand might be. You could leverage symbolics to first understand sort of the market size, or market acceptance size, if you will, of each of those brand platforms. And then you would bring people into symbolics to then say, basically, what would you expect this expression of this brand to really feel like and kind of like feel like in your life, or how it would best support you. And then they build those expressions. That tells you from a gut perspective, what are they expecting? And then as the healthcare system, then you can, once you understand what your consumers are expecting there, then you can say, can we really truly and authentically deliver that? In my experience, there's usually some that the client can deliver against, and then there's other that, like, that would be way too much of a stretch for us for X, Y, or Z reason. So I think it really supports putting some, I mean, you're essentially co-creating with hundreds of your potential customers the future vision of your brand through this method. And it's really that gut check to say, have we gotten it right? Can we actually deliver against that, or can we not? We
One of
also,
the other questions that came up, what sort of problems is the process good for? Well, at the highest level, what brand doesn't face the problem of how can we increase engagement with and uptake of our brand? Now, Symbolics is not a process that's going to provide all of the answers to that question, but within those broad questions of how to increase engagement and uptake, there may be fundamental problems relating to how people understand and respond to the messages that the brand is sending. And so by helping to develop a set of answers about what the deep systems one gut level responses are to brand messages and components and signifiers and things like that, what you're really doing is you're generating the answers to how can we increase that engagement at the gut level. You're getting those answers. So yes, engagement, with an uptake of the brand, but more specifically, what are the messages and the meanings that we need to be conveying to trigger all of that?
yeah. So Alan asks, what's the range of costs that's going to dictate your target market? So Alan, this is a great question. There's not a fixed fee on this, because obviously it depends on who you're trying to reach out to, how expensive it is to get that type of individual engaged in the project. How many, are you looking at 250 people, or are you looking at, 2,000, 3,000, 4,000, whatever it may be, right? So there's a lot of variable costs in here. It is a standalone method, though. So I know a lot of times, similar projective, or similar methodologies, or sort of tack-ons, if you will, to surveys, and they are not seen as standalone. This is really a standalone method. And so, in terms of answering directly, the range, while it's large, it usually starts at about 75,000 and then goes to, upwards of, 250,000, depending upon the scale and scope of it, how many countries, etc. Another question we have is, how long does this process take? That also depends on the scale of it. However, I would say the average amount of time is about 3 months from start to finish. So that's from sign of SOW all the way to, here's your final report, and let's internalize this together and figure out the action items from your group. We've got about 5 minutes left. I just want to see if there's any final questions. Looks like there's one coming in.
Maybe someone's typing there. Yeah. Okay.
Okay. Maybe not.
So one of the things that's been, I think, sort of in the background in a lot of these questions, it has to do with the basic mechanics of how this works. How does it cost? How long does it take? Et cetera, et cetera. And I'm sure everyone sort of watching and participating in this webinar understands that that's going to be driven by what's the size and the scope of the particular project that that you bring to this. But the other sort of set of questions here has to do with sort of like, so what exactly is it that this is cracking open for us? What do we understand better and are able to act better on once we use this sort of technique? And what it is you're able to crack open and understand better is, what does our brand mean to people? And once you understand that, you really understand, what's triggering them to really connect with it. So.
All right. I know that someone asked, will there be a recording of this session? Yes, there will be. It'll be sent out via email either later today or first thing tomorrow. I guess we're going to move to wrap up. And so what I'd like to do is just, give a heartfelt thank you to all of you for spending time with us this morning.
Thank you.
If this has piqued interest for you and you really want to dive deeper, either to understand some of the mechanics of it or really explore, potential fit for yourself and something that you may be thinking about for your organization. We, genuinely support you to reach out. We'd love to have a conversation, a deeper conversation with you. And regardless, if we don't know you personally already, we'd love to stay connected. So feel free to reach out to, either Peter or I or both on LinkedIn so that we can stay connected. And we look forward to, continuing to engage in conversation as relevant with all of you. So thank you so much for spending time, and we will be in touch. Take care.
Thank you. Bye bye.